Hello and welcome to this 132nd episode of Old Romans Unscripted. And we apologise that we haven't been on there for a couple of weeks. I've noticed since the world's forgotten about COVID that suddenly things return to normal. So my time has suddenly been taken up by various demands, and I know the same is true for Bishop Caeli and Brother Stanislaus, but nonetheless, this week we're here. Hello, Brother Stanislaus, how are you?
I'm doing well, Excellency. Thank you. How are you doing?
Not too bad, not too bad.
Good.
Thank you very much. It's been a hectic old time, but it's been good. It's been good. I've been to Armenia, of course, since last we were on air, and that was fascinating. Absolutely recommend if you ever get the opportunity to go to Armenia. It's been an official Christian country since 305 AD, after the conversion of the king by St. Gregory the Illuminator, who established monastic life in the Savannovank Monastery by the Great Lake in the center of Armenia in 305 AD. So fascinating place to visit. Lots of monasteries, great food. Of course, our Armenian guide was quick to point out that which we thought was Turkish or Greek was originally Armenian. And interesting comparisons with the liturgy, with the traditional Western Rite liturgy and that of the Armenian apostolic liturgy. You can see there definitely a common origin and influence. I had the great opportunity to witness a baptism, and even though the whole thing was in Armenian, and sort of vocally, I had no idea what was going on. All the ritual actions were pretty much identical to the traditional Tridentine rite of baptism, replete with all the anointings of the back and chest and forehead, etc., the ephatha, the breathing out and the exorcism, all these identifiable similarities, and likewise with their Mass, the Divine Liturgy. Unlike the Eastern Orthodox, the Armenian Apostolic Church, they don't have iconostasis. Instead, they use a great curtain to separate the Holy of Holies, the sanctuary, from the rest of the church. The churches are built in a very Roman basilica style, and later a cruciform style, but still basically with a central basilica nave, the altar in an apse, all eastward facing, and the pattern of the liturgy again, although it was in Armenian, felt very redolent of the traditional Latin rite. So I found that fascinating, very interesting, especially as, of course, their liturgy is as old as that liturgy we believe that derives ultimately from St. Peter. So, yeah, very interesting time. And we've got, I hope, a very interesting program for you all today. There's a lot, of course, that's been going on since we last saw each other. Hello and welcome to Paul in Seattle there. Hi. Peggy, great, in East Tennessee. Good to see you. Father Christois, good evening. Do folks say hi in the comments and let us know where you're watching from. It's always interesting to know the eccentric, we might say, or eclectic, perhaps eclectic might be a better term, eclectic demographic of our viewers. Barbara, who of course is in Brighton here with me in the UK, Brighton, and Barbara's just over the valley from me there. Welcome, Barbara. So we've entitled this show A Perfect Storm, which is the title of the second episode of the trilogy Mass of the Ages, which is a video series looking at the catastrophe, basically, of Vatican II. And this new episode, so the previous episode, episode 1 of Mass of the Ages, sort of focused more on the kind of phenomena of the traditional Latin liturgy, and various commentators, theologians, scholars, clergy, and faithful giving their opinions and insights into the traditional Latin Mass. This second episode, entitled A Perfect Storm, goes more into the details of the catastrophe and of the crisis. It came out on Ascension Day, so last Thursday, and well worth watching, and some very interesting information and observations came out. I have to say that not a lot of it was new to me, but certainly I know there are many who will find some of the information given quite revelationary. I just want to play a couple of clips from it, just to give you a kind of flavor. So one of the things I appreciated was a few minutes where they demonstrated very subtly the influence of exterior forces on the nature of music in the church. And a great friend of Bishop Kelly's and ours was interviewed about sacred music. So I'm just going to play that little clip now.
Day by day, day by day. I remember I was a Boy Scout and going camping, and we'd sing songs around the campfire. Those made you feel great. You know, you're sitting around the fire, you're having the s'mores, and some, scoutmaster has the guitar. That's fantastic. Should we repeat that at Mass? No, go have another cookout. go to the campfire again.
Now that follows, that precedes a little segment where they play various well-known secular pieces of music and crossfade into contemporary settings for the Mass. One of which I hadn't realized. They played the Celine Dion song from the film Titanic, My Heart Will Go On, and on and on and on, and segued that into a contemporary version of the Agnus Dei, Lamb of God. Likewise, a popular piece of jazz music from the 60s, Take 5, which of course sounds very similar to a contemporary song called Sing of the Lord's Goodness. So that was very interesting. And Kevin Allen, who was commenting there, has conducted the Schola and arranged the music for our ordinations in Chicago in recent years. So it was good to see and hear him. I'm going to play another clip. Now, this chap is probably better known as a political commentator, but he is, in fact, a traditional Catholic.
I do not want to put myself forward as some expert of the documents, as some canon lawyer, as a theologian. I am not. I am but a lay Catholic looking at the effect of the Second Vatican Council, and it has been a disaster. The things that they set out to do, increase participation, bring the youths back into the church, it just didn't happen. The opposite happened. And so now it would seem, if we have let these very radical people lead things for a while, perhaps we ought to now listen to the people who had urged caution, who have been vindicated every single step of the way.
Yes, indeed. Brother Stanislaus, have you had a chance to watch A Perfect Storm?
Oh, yes. Like so many, I've been waiting for it. It's not that I have a problem with the whole series. I do. But I decided to go ahead and to partake in it because I wanted to, it's part of like the way I take scholasticism, in a sense that there are things that are out there that I don't really care to read. But in order to understand the perspective better, I need to understand what's going on there. And to so it's really, I'm watching him from an academic perspective for me, like you. And I kind of laughed. I didn't mean to snicker when you said that you didn't learn anything, because I thought, gosh, I hope not, because it's the most superficial of presentations. However, one of the things that it coincided with, because I didn't see the first one until just a few weeks ago, even though it's been out there for a while. But I have been praying about it and reflecting about it and checking out these people. As you know, Excellency, I have had some conversations going on with some of the experts that they cite in the film. People I'm very thankful for. Not that I cite them for anything but conversation at this point. But one of the things that I have been struggling with in my own spiritual life is this idea of how can they all of them, the theologians they had, the composers, the political commentators, Michael Knowles, who I like very much, they're all well-instructed, intelligent men and women, as far as I know from watching, in our circles, Joseph Shaw from across the pond, So we know these people. Okay. So I'm watching them go, okay, and I've done my research and I've even read the articles and okay. And as you can look, I didn't know my board was going to be a part of the picture, but when I watched it again, I was taking notes, and I thought, because the Excellency asked for some comments. And so I started to take notes, and I thought, wait a minute. Okay. So don't look at, these are my notes. So don't look at them. This is how kind of I think. But, I got over here. One of the things that they talk about, the guardians of, they cite Pope Benedict, Cardinal Ratzinger, that the Holy Father, Pope Peter, the charism of Peter, is the guardian of the authentic tradition. And he makes sure to point that out. He's not a king or a dictator. Okay, we know that. We've kind of felt the heel of that, meaning Old Romans. We felt the heel of Peter in the Vatican. We do every day in many ways on our neck. Okay, but the guardian of the... Then I thought of Pope Francis, who the film calls a dictator in a sense. He called this Traditionis Custodes, the guardians of tradition. And so I thought, well, if Cardinal Ratzinger, who at the time was the secretary or the prefect of the Holy Office, calls the charism of St. Peter as primarily the guardian of the authentic tradition, not to make things up, not to give new instructions, nothing like the guardian. Okay. Then if that guardian calls a motu proprio guardians of the tradition, and then instructing the faithful on what is the tradition, because remember, there's one Roman rite, and you can find all of the rite within the new rite. Remember, I came up with that dictum. What we knew in the past is gone. What we know now is the new. That's all we know now. That's what they're telling us. Okay, so in a way, if you're following me, which I get if you're not, he's saying that we all share in the charism of Peter, not just he who sits on the throne of Peter, but everybody, all baptized Christians. And maybe, as I read in a quote he gave to a Buddhist visiting the Vatican, even the Buddha and our Lord shared in ministry, at the same type of ministry. So maybe he thinks that all humans share in the tradition, sharing the defining and distributing the traditions of, as they so aptly put it, of how the world is today, what the world needs today. Now, those of us, like those watching and those who will watch, and certainly the Excellency and I, we know all this. So why are these films important? And the third part that's coming, which I think is going to be their most difficult one to produce, because it's accessible. And so it's accessible to every Catholic is what I mean. Even my dear old mother. I hope she's not watching. Because, you know, they go into the film and they talk about, like Dr. Kwasniewski does a great job of using the tree. And if you look at our videos, and if, I know Excellency can go in, that we did a show about Lex Orandi, Lex Credendi. And we asked some great questions. This is right after Traditionis Custodes. You can go watch it. And I think it's a great show if you want to go further and understand more of the minute details of what they're talking about. Okay, that is what I explained later on as the taproot. Now, in those videos on the Pope of Woke, go look it up. Those videos, I said that Peter is the taproot. Okay, they use this. Now, I'm not saying they got it from me, but they use this and they show it as a tree. Okay, and Dr. Kwasniewski explains that as this organic development, just like a plant, liturgy organically developed over this, roughly 2,000 years of our sacred history. Okay, and like he said, first 500, lots of development expected. Second 500, still kind of a lot, but not as much as the first 500. Third 500, stability. Well, that's the Tridentine Mass. Okay, so how can, because this is what all my little notes are, how can you come and wreck the tree? You come and knock all those branches off as they show in the film, and then still say, oh, but this is still the same thing. This is my problem with everybody in that film, because they all sit there and they still say, at least for now, and I'm getting it, they're all journeying, I get it. And it's taken me some time to try to understand where they are. But I think I'm getting it. And what I've understood to try to help bring it back around is that in my struggle, in my prayer, in my reflection, what I received was this, is that they are doing as much as they are able to do, what they feel they are able to do, and their struggle with what they see is obviously wrong. And each of them, let me just cite, because I've already mentioned Dr. Kwasniewski. If you read his stuff, you'd wonder if this guy even goes to regular Novus Ordo. You'd swear he doesn't, but I can tell you he does. I mean, I don't know because I'm not over there, but I think Joseph Shaw might be the same way, or maybe closer to it. But you know where I'm going. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering. Okay, but then they use Dr. Marshall. We have brought him up several times. Okay, same thing. Why haven't they looked at us and said, like they said at the end of the film, oh, you're right. And like you brought up, and which I think you're going to bring up, the not only the arrest of Cardinal Zen in China, what they're doing with Cardinal Zen, what the Vatican has not said about Cardinal Zen, but then about the ordination of Father Reed and how he did it and who did it and what it means and what is everybody saying? Because there's really no difference in us. We are not objectors, and I think this is the difference. It's a subtle difference and maybe a superficial difference. But for me, I think this is a difference between us and the SSPX. We are not objectors in the same sense as the way the objectors came out of Vatican II. We are responding to a canonical, invalid canonical move on made onto us that had been settled for centuries. So It is different. It's the same, but I still kind of look and say, okay, so where's the help? Because we do need help.
I mean, there's a lot there to sort of unpack.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, the issue, of course, and if folks remember our last episode, the 131st episode of Unscripted, we discussed the difference between traditional and traditionalism. And of course, this series of Mass of the Ages is produced by those who are attached to traditionalism, because it is, as you say, they are still within the institutional church. They will say things like the Novus Ordo Mass is valid, but it's problematic. Some of them, though, in this episode were brave enough to suggest that there is a definite discrepancy between the theology of the new Mass and that of the old. I watched a couple of other YouTube commentators, a chap whose channel is called De Crevi, who's based in Ireland. He reviewed this episode with a friend of his, and one of the things he said, and again, they both attend the institutional churches. They try to go to the Latin Mass. They prefer the Latin Mass. And as one of them said, of course, there are problems with Vatican II aside from the liturgy. The fact that the teachings, some of the teachings of Vatican II don't chime with the catechisms that were authored and authorized prior to Vatican II. And as you say, even with some of those commentators in this episode, I think there is an increasing awareness, and more and more of these, as you say, educated and intelligent people are beginning. Well, the scales are beginning to fall away from their eyes. Doctor, I can never remember how to pronounce his name.
He says K. He says call him Dr. K.
Dr. K. Dr. K, for example. As you say, if you read his articles, and he writes many articles, if you read his articles, you'd think he was one of us. You'd think he was an old Roman. And especially listening sometimes to Dr. Marshall. Likewise, the frustrating thing with him is that you think he's going to follow to the end of the logic and declare himself an old Roman, because he is so close. They're all beginning to realize and to recognize just how catastrophic Vatican II was for the church. But primarily at the moment, they're all transfixed with the liturgy. So for them, it's about the aesthetical value and difference, and the devotional difference, and gradually they're becoming more awake to the theological differences. And I think the next episode, as you say, is going to be an interesting one. And I just want to play, and then we can move on to the onto the topic of himself. But this is a clip from A Perfect Storm with Dom Alcuin Reid.
We're supposed to have a new springtime in the life of the church. The new liturgy was supposed to attract people to the church and sustain people in the practice of their faith. Well, that's 5 decades ago now, and if we look at the statistics, the churches are emptying, not filling up. The new liturgy hasn't stopped the hemorrhage. It isn't filling up the churches.
Okay, so that's Dom Alcuin Reid, who has leapt to the fore in, I'd say, the past decade as a liturgical scholar, in part because of his revision of the great Monsignor Fortescue and O'Connell's work, The Ceremonies of the Roman Rite Described, which was the Bible for rubricis and liturgists from the turn of the 20th century up until the new Mass. In it is described all the rubrics of the ceremonies, right down to, where everyone should stand and what they should be wearing, what they should be doing, etc., etc. He revised that for the 1962 rubrics, which, of course, because, of course, the 1962 is the authorized version of the Missale Romanum, of the traditional rite. And now he is now the prior of a new Benedictine community in France, and has been there 4 or 5 years now, and still writes and gives conferences about the traditional liturgy, etc., and has become a focus of some controversy in recent weeks, because, as Brother already alluded to, he received ordination irregularly. Now, in a nutshell, basically the bishop of his diocese, who allowed him to begin the Benedictine community, so they are not a part of the Benedictine Confederation of monasteries. Instead, they are an association of the faithful by diocesan right. They are established canonically that way, meaning they owe their vows and their obedience and their grace and favor lodgings to the diocesan bishop. And he has been generally very supportive of them over the years. He has allowed them the use of diocesan buildings. He has encouraged them. He has attended and celebrated the traditional rites with them. He has graciously permitted various other noted traditionalist prelates and others to celebrate liturgies for them. He has attended their conferences on the traditional liturgy, and otherwise has been a sort of a very good egg toward them. However, last December, the question arose of ordinations for Dom Alcuin and others in the Benedictine community. Now, there is a background issue, background story here, that some 2 decades ago or more, Dom Alcuin was a deacon in Australia. Some allegations were made against him, or actually he was around the time of his ordination as a deacon, one should say. Various accusations were made, and he was ordained deacon but was never ordained priest, and for a while spent time in limbo, in a kind of no man's land, and then joined a Benedictine monastery, and then later founded this new Benedictine community in Fréjus-Toulon in France. And as far as I understand it, and I want to be careful not to defame anyone, but the allegations were never proven, but even so, a kind of black mark had remained against his name, which still prevented him from being ordained to the priesthood, because when this was brought up with the diocesan bishop, he was basically apparently told by Rome, no, there's a black mark there, shouldn't happen, can't happen. This despite the fact that various other notable prelates were advocating for his ordination, We might guess that such personages might include Bishop Athanasius Scheider, and perhaps he who is rumoured to have conducted the illicit subsequent ordination of Dom Alcuin as a priest, Cardinal Raymond Leo Burke. Now,
I heard a different name.
Okay. What name did you hear?
I heard Cardinal Muller.
Oh, right. Okay. Even more interesting. So both of them being reputable canonists, both Muller and Burke, whichever it is, it's an interesting situation, because we now have a doyen of the traditionalist movement, irregularly ordained and now suspended by his diocesan bishop, but irregularly ordained by whoever it was, reputedly very regular kind of personage. Now, in the old days, it was a privilege of cardinals to exercise a form of personal jurisdiction wherever they went. It was for this reason, for example, that in a pontifical high mass in the old liturgy, in the old days, celebrated by a cardinal, he would always use a throne. Whereas usually a bishop who was visiting outside of his own diocese, outside of his own jurisdiction, normally would use a fold stool to be seated and to pontificate from. Cardinals, wherever they went in the church, were automatically entitled to various privileges, including a kind of personal jurisdiction. So in the old code of 1917, it was nothing for a cardinal to ordain anyone he so chose, wherever and whenever he liked. And there was basically next to nothing that anybody really could do about it, if anybody objected. Now, no such privilege, as far as I know, pertains to contemporary cardinals. The usual process is for men to be ordained by their diocesan bishop. If they are religious within his diocese, then he may do it, or he may authorize by letters dimissorial somebody else to do it for him. Likewise, some seminarians in the nationalist seminaries in Rome may not be ordained by their diocesan, but they'll be ordained by a bishop in Rome. It might be from their national country, or it might be a bishop of the Diocese of Rome, but again by letters dimissorial. And likewise, normally, Cardinal Burke, for example, quite often performs the ordinations for the traditionalist societies like the FSSP or the Institute of Christ the King, of which, of course, there are many photos and videos available to see online of the aesthetically beautiful liturgies that he has pontificated in. But to my knowledge, there is no concession, as there was in the old law, for cardinals to act, for cardinals to have a kind of personal jurisdiction under which they may ordain.
Could I interrupt? Just interrupt you, because I have a couple of questions for you. First, do you know whether or not, even though there's no, you don't know of a contemporary privilege for the cardinals, was the ancient privilege taken away?
Sorry, say it again.
What, even though there might not be a contemporary privilege for the cardinal, was the ancient privilege, I'm presuming, was not something formal. It was something understood. I mean, it was not something that was.
It was codified by canon law.
Okay, in the Pio Benedictine Code.
Yeah.
Okay, so we know at least up to 1917 that it was there. Okay, so it was not, I guess, somewhere it's in the new code then. It's referenced, or at least the old code law is referenced somehow in the new code. It may not be the new law, but they might say, well, these come from, this particular.
Yeah, maybe.
Right,
I haven't really looked at. I should have looked into this.
Well, so what I'm getting to is that I'm asking the question is that, was it taken away? Was that codified privilege taken away, or simply not in canon law anymore, or can it be assumed?
Well, I think that is the question. I think that is the question.
So it might just be that a courageous cardinal just needs to do it.
Perhaps.
Okay.
But of
because
course,
that's sometimes.
But of course, what's bizarre about the whole thing is that these particular commentators, so those involved with Mass of the Ages, Dom Alcuin Reid himself and various others, have for the last 20, 30 years berated Archbishop Lefebvre and the Society of St. Pius X, saying that there is no justification for them holding irregular ordination.
Sure. And by extension, the Old Romans.
Exactly. And yet they are now, this is a very interesting thing, Dom Alcuin Reid issued a statement, and in it he basically justifies his ordination for the same reasons as Archbishop Lefebvre justified his ordinations and consecration. That there is.
Well, I did read it. It's good. The other question I had for you, because it's the same thing, is Cardinal Burke's doing all these ordinations, whoever else, okay, FSSP, the IX, what form are they being ordained under the ancient rite or under the new rite in Latin?
As far as I know, at the moment, they're still using the traditional rite.
Okay.
You may recall. Well, you may recall there was I think back in February, there was some suggestion that initially the FSSP had secured some kind of directive saying that because of the particular nature and charism of their apostolates, with the traditional rite, that they could still be ordained in the traditional rite.
I did see that. That was a particular. It was not something that went out to the whole church. That, like you said, that was for a particular question for them, and I think for a particular area, in fact. And by extension, I read later that apparently there's a 2-year limit on this. That there's an understanding that there's a 2-year sort of, okay, we're going to give you 2 years to get everything ready, to get everyone used to everything. But after that 2 years, everything's going to the new rite. We might let you do it in Latin, but it's going to because there's only one expression of the Roman rite.
Yeah. That wouldn't surprise me if that wasn't the deal.
It's my information that it has been a few years now, especially in Chicago, when Supich came along, that they have not been using the ancient rite. They were told to ordain with the new rite.
You mean the St. John Cantius?
Yes. Yeah.
Canons. Yeah.
So, which is basically almost all that's left over there. Okay, so by extension, everything that we're talking about, because what Mass of the Ages and what I think even their title, A Perfect Storm, it makes me angry to hear that, because for me, it's not a perfect storm, it's a perfect plan. It's obvious. They talk about that. They talk about, they almost prop up Paul VI, even though I love Pope Paul. I didn't see him a lot. I was young, I was a boy, but like a good Catholic, I prayed for him and I had love for him, and I don't mean this in a disrespectful way, but even in this film, the second part, he's asking all kinds of questions. Who's doing this? Who's doing this? Who's doing this? He calls Bonini in. Oh, well, he gets rid of the cardinal secretary, and he makes him the secretary of the whole thing, and says, well, you straighten all this out because somebody's not, That was when he could have intervened and said, this was, if my dates are right, this was around 1964. Now, things had already been done, things had already been published, promulgated, but as the Pope, as they were talking about, that is when, as the guardian of the authentic tradition, he should have stepped in and said, no, ex cathedra, no, that's it. We're stopping all of this now, and we're just going as it was. And that's what the Pope is supposed to do. Instead, he let Bonini continue to do what he wanted to do. That's why I called it, it was a perfect plan, not a perfect storm. I don't believe for a moment that Paul VI wasn't in on it. He was part of that storm. If they want to call it a storm, fine. He was part of it. And I think that Dom Reed wants to say that as well. He doesn't, but it's obvious they must believe that. And so when they go to the third part, which they're entitling at this point, Traditionis Custodes, I don't know how they're going to do it, except it's going to be very superficial. Because unless that whole production team and all their theologians and people that they're using are going to say, well, we realize we're going to have to be part of the Great Resistance. And we're going to stay in line with everything that the church has always been. But we realize now that we have to take a stand and stand up to these bishops and these false shepherds and say no more. Not because it's our mass, because that's some, I kind of got that idea that, the way they presented it, well, even though it seemed like very nice people, well, the Latin Mass is not going to go away because we love the Latin Mass. That's not why the Latin Mass is not going to go away. It's because it is the sacrament. It's the most blessed sacrament. Until our Lord himself returns and tells us something different, it will remain as it has been, as we have continued to promulgate. And so, in a way, the old Romans, we stay in our lane. That's what we're doing, is staying in our lane, and that's what providing the sacraments. It's not about proselytizing, in a sense, about conversion. Excellency says this all the time. That's not who we are. Even though it may seem like that way to some people, that's not who we are. When people approach me and they say, who are you? I say, come. You want to pray? Come. I'm doing my prayers. You're not going to get a lot of it, and I'm going to be very busy, but okay. And God willing, soon there'll be time when there's Holy Mass. Okay, well, come. And that's what changes hearts and minds. And that's what I think what we're doing. And that's why we remain sort of unsung watchers, and I realized, what these guys are, on all the, Cameron Hurd is I would love to meet his whole family. Cameron Hurd and everybody putting the whole thing together. They seem like such great guys. They're Hafflets. They know that the tree's been devastated, but they still take it. And they still go up there and receive, oh no, this time I'll kneel. Oh, this time, this is a good church. This is not, oh, that's a good priest. He's not. They're Hafflets. They're accepting half as truth and saying, well, when what they should be doing is what we're doing. Go to the truth, because I don't need Francis to tell me that's the truth. What he can tell me is what's wrong, which is obvious. Because remember, in our faith, that when someone questions our faith and morals, because when it comes to obedience, yes, we should be obedient, unless it challenges our faith or our morals. Then our well-formed conscience must be our guide. And all of you watching and listening at whatever time know that's wrong. And even though this film series, I'm thankful for it because it's helping a lot of people I know. I'm hopeful and grateful to them at the same time for what they're doing, because they will. I believe they're trying to understand, and all they're trying to, it's nothing. We don't have anything. We're not keeping anything for ourselves. We're not creating anything. We're not coming up with new plans, new committees, nothing. All we're doing is preserving the sacraments as they have always been believed by everyone and by all in the entire church across the world, as they explained so well in that film, that second part of that film, Mass of the Ages. And this is what I think that it's not that we're missing it. One is the world doesn't care. They really don't. I mean, what did they talk? The statistics showed that the stat they use, 63% of Catholics who go to Holy Mass at least once a week don't believe in the real presence. 63%. So all these parishes that I pass, empty, most of them empty, but those are even if there have people on Sundays, especially the ones that might have full people on. I know that almost 7 out of every 10 of those people in there don't even believe what they say they believe. What they say is in there. I know, and then those people do not have the catechism. So that's, in a way, even for me, I know the Excellency received Novus Ordo training in the seminary as well, just like I did. And there was no formal traditionalist training. And I think about what called me, and when I heard it, this was years ago. And all the questions and the reading and the study on my own, the doors I've had slammed in my face, the rejection, everything they talk about in the film, and then finally having to walk away because they force you to. And that's where we are. But that's what I want to, what I want for people to understand most of all, is that what we bring is that what you're searching for. It's not me, it's not Excellency, it's not anybody else that you're going to see as an Old Roman in whatever part of the world is. It's simply preserving and presenting the sacraments as they always have been, especially the most blessed sacrament and the sacred liturgy, and then living that life, as we talked about a couple of shows ago, that actually living the life of a traditionalist, which is basically the difference between a traditionalist and someone who is attached or to whatever degree to traditionalism. It's not that you cannot grow, but there is a point where there is a break because you realize you have to. And that's a very, very, very difficult thing to do. I don't wish it on anybody. I don't encourage anybody. You think that maybe that's what I do. I don't. Because it's like, in fact, I'm glad I kept talking because I was thinking as I was reflecting, and I think about my own emotions because, God willing, I'm approaching sacred ordination later this year, and I'm continue to pray and reflect and trying to hear the voice of God in my own heart and what He desires of me in my vocation and in my mission. And because, sometimes we think, especially me, I'm an older vocation, I'll be 56. We might think we have it all figured out. And it's important to keep our heart and our mind open to what He wants because He's always presenting new things. And I was thinking of, because even with my health and things, I think, oh Lord, I feel a little worn down. What are you doing with me? And then He presents this and He presents that. And okay, well, get up. You got to keep going. And I think of St. Paul, or I was thinking of the patriarch Joseph and how he had to, in a way, he kind of stood for love, and his brothers hated that his father loved him so much, but he had such a pure love for his father. He was the son of his father's old age. And then they so wickedly, Reuben and his brother planned, no storm. They planned and they threw him down the cistern. And he trusted them. He trusted his brothers to take care of him, to give him what he needed. And they threw him down there and they told his fathers that he was dead. And then somehow we believe he kept his faith in God, and he was picked up, of course, by pagans. And, we know the story of him going to Egypt, but then he has to see his brothers. And it's his brothers who come and say, we need food. We don't even know who you are. But he recognized them. And what did he do? Of course, he didn't show them, but he burst into tears. And it reminded me of something that we talked about a couple of shows ago. But I think about that. And I don't mean this in any way, except I think, is that not who we are as old Romans? That's how I feel. Because, especially being here, remaining in the Archdiocese of Detroit, I know I have a lot of detractors. And as many more, my former brother diocesan people are hearing about me, that I'm still around and ordained, I hear everything. And it is, you do want to, and I go as far as the Archbishop here, you do want to be embraced by your brethren, even if they've treated you badly, especially when you have good news, the best news, wonderful news, joyful news. You want to rejoice with your family, yet they reject you. And so I have been reflecting about the Patriarch Joseph and how that must have been for him. But what did he do? As he did with his father, which is what they were jealous of, the love that he shared with his father, that super abundant love that he had with his father came so natural to him. It continued to come naturally, and he awarded them super abundantly with more than what they needed. Even more so, he made them pay for it. And then when they searched their sacks on their way home, they found everything that they used to pay for was there. And they didn't know what it meant. And then they even returned, thinking, oh, we're going to get in trouble. And Joseph sort of playing with them, and then finally revealing who he is. And I think, because I ran into somebody, and I continue to run into people, even though Detroit is a rather large area, here in the United States, I do continue to run to people I used to be around, and people who are slowly realizing kind of what I had done, and who have judged me in very harsh ways, but people who I would have never thought would say the things that they have said, or would spread the things that they have spread. But as I run into them, and I realize that as they realize what's going on, and how, like in Dom Breed's diocese in France, and like it's going to happen here in Chicago and in the UK and everywhere else, the diocesan traditional Latin Mass is going to disappear, regardless of the IX, the Institute of Christ the King, or the FSSP. It's going to disappear. Read between the lines, Dr. Kwasniewski. You may have already done that. They're going to be coming to us. And it's hard for me to believe, they're going to be coming to me. After all these years, this is my 10th year in Detroit, all these years, all that's going on, all I've seen, all the things that have happened, all the people that have come, and they're going to lose everything that I've learned, that they introduced me to in many ways, and that I shared with them. It's all going to be taken away from them as well. And they're going to end up gravitating, because we're going to be the only place legally that will lead, because there might be a couple other places, but they're doing it, they might be doing the Anglican rite. And so it might look aesthetically like what's supposed to look like. So I don't know if you have any comment on all that, but that's kind of what's going on here. I think your mic.
Yeah, sorry, I was muted. There's a lot there. And I was reminded earlier today of a video I gave on vocations, Old Roman vocations. The thing that all we get, we don't get the social status and regard and everything else. There's no clericalism. in the traditional Catholic movement, really. Not in the way that it's used as a slur in the contemporary church. Old Roman priests don't receive special honors or privileges or social or material status or anything else. In many ways, the difference between us, for example, and other traditional Catholics is we're a worker priest movement in many ways. Most of our clergy are bivocational, so they're maintaining their financial support not from the church but in other ways, and invariably wherever we go we're regarded with some derision and some scorn, particularly by contemporary institutional Catholics, and even sometimes by, and particularly, I would say, by traditionalist Catholics, those who are in the institutional church, who think that anything outside of it is to be denigrated. And yet, though, that is changing. More people are beginning to appreciate the Society of St. Pius X. More people are beginning to appreciate us as Old Romans. And you're right, if Francis continues for another few years, or if his successor maintains the same policy and polity, then the TLM in diocesan parishes and chapels will disappear. It will disappear, and the traditionalist societies likewise will be forced into choosing Rome or the faith. No matter what accommodations are may or may not be provided now, Rome's long-term plan is to get rid of the TLM. Now, unless the Holy Spirit really is involved in the next conclave, and despite all the odds, a moderate or traditionalist Pope is elected, the sad reality is that the Roman Catholic Church is now going the same way as all the other mainstream denominations. So progressive theology is already infiltrated the church. Just look at Germany, look at Latin America, listen to Pope Francis, and perhaps not in 10 years, but maybe in 20 or 30 years, it wouldn't surprise me at all if the Roman Church started to ordain women as deacons or even as priests, etc. If the Church continues in the trajectory that it's on, that is all going to happen. And we have to realize that our situation is not akin, as the Sedevacantists would have it, to the time of the Great Western Schism and the time of interregnums and irregular popes and all the rest of it. Our situation is more akin to the time of the height of the Arianist heresy. Archbishop Lefebvre is our or was our modern day Athanasius, and we likewise, all of us, not just clergy but those who will be faithful Catholics ourselves, need to adopt the Athanasian motto, Athanasius contra mundum, Athanasius against the world. because it is, worldly values, worldly ideologies, worldly political views that are infecting and changing the institutional church. It has nothing to do with theology. It's very clear if you look at, and I don't recommend it, but if you seriously study and analyze progressive theology, etc., that it's not theology, it's anthropology, it's sociology, it's faux psychology. It's got nothing to do with understanding and interpreting divine revelation. And of course, that's the great thing, is that, and this is what it all comes down to, the difference between orthodox theology and contemporary theology is that the former relies solely upon what has been divinely revealed. The latter believes that divine revelation can be added to or can be ignored. And, in terms of Old Roman vocations, it's not an easy path, because you will not receive anything like the kind of support, material, certainly, and to an extent, emotionally, as other seminarians and clergy would otherwise receive. Ours is a lonely ascent to Calvary.
That's why I think that I just, as you know, I have had the privilege of having several men with me for several years, and being able to, I like to say, I can go through anything. I've run a novitiate, so a 2-year novitiate. So it is not easy, and I've mentioned this to you before, that I do not believe that I have met a man who could make it as an Old Roman, because it's literally, I am going by my own experience, and I have been blessed to have received a lot prior to my finding the Old Romans. However, even still, unless you are ready to face everything as if you have been completely abandoned, then it's not a path you're going to be able to do. Most of modern men, no matter how educated they are, have the theology, catechis, and practice of modernity. They have not been taught about sacrifice and the way the ancients understood it. Not that I have, but I've learned the hard way, and I don't know that anyone that's ever been around me in the last several years could have made it with me. I know they wouldn't have. They wouldn't have, because it's very much. Just read any story about any of the missionaries of the church in very dire times of the church. This is what happens, and some may say, well, why not live within the boundaries of the institutional church and do everything you can within? Because I think that maybe there's some argument to be made there. But if I can, Excellency, I know I've been talking a lot today.
Right.
When Father Edward Perron, everybody watching or is going to watch this has heard his name. When he was taken from us at Assumption Grotto, I remember so well that Sunday morning when it was announced. And I'd already been there several years. And it was that afternoon and that week people, many people were coming to me, brother, what do we do? What do we do? What do we do? And I'm not saying here's my response. My immediate response to them was, remember your faith. Father Perron is never going to come back to this parish ever again. And every single one of them, now these are faithful people. These are people I'd see at everything, traditionalist people. And every single one of them would back away from me with mouth agape, saying, you have no faith. You don't believe. Prayer can do anything. Okay, now, as a spiritual director, maybe even as a theologian, and God willing, as a priest, I'm answering them. I'm saying, what I'm telling you is that what I'm sharing with you is I'm trying to read things. And you're coming to me. I'm telling you what I'm reading. And that was almost 3 years ago. And I take no, but the reason why I knew is because I told him, I said, the Archdiocese is never going to let him return triumphantly to this parish. Because that's what it would be. It would be a triumphant return. And they've exonerated him pretty much of everything. But as he had that triumphant return, he's basically still under the thumb of the chancery. Okay. In the same way that I say, and I feel like, we are never, at least in my lifetime, and I don't believe that because I would not be honest with you, and we've already talked with our listeners, with people who watch the things that I do. You know how I feel about this. And that what do we do at a time like this? God is reminding you of what you don't have. Because the stress and the surprise and the desire to want to do something should be your cue to get on your knees. Pray. That is in your control. Pray. Control what you have. Control what's inside of you. You can scream and you can go protest. It's not going to do any good. 5,000 people could show up to Challoner Grotto right now and say, we demand Father Perron return. It's not going to matter. The church is not a democracy as many times as I was told in the seminary. It's not. And that's what we have to understand. So what we do is important. And what we're trying to get people to understand is hold on to your faith. Don't let this discourage you so much so that you lose that which you're saying you want to hold on to. Because that can be a very, very easy thing. And I even think it's a trick of the evil one.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's hear some famous words about him and the situation.
Through some crack, the smoke of Satan has entered the temple of God. There is doubt, uncertainty, disquiet, dissatisfaction, confrontation. Doubt has entered our consciences, and it entered by windows that should have been open to the light. There was belief that after the council, there would be a day of sunshine for the history of the church. Instead, it is the arrival of a day of clouds, of tempest, of darkness, of uncertainty.
It's incredible, really, that it should have been him to have said those things. And of course, they were said towards the end of his life and pontificate. Perhaps he had had time to reflect. Who knows?
I'm sure he did. In the film they say that when they approached him and he said, "This is for my successor," and because he died a few weeks later, and he kind of knew that his death was coming. But I still say, when I hear that quote, oh my gosh, when I hear it in the film, you don't want to know what my response was to him. But that's when he should have stopped everything. Even then, Okay, 1972. So much could have been avoided. I mean, maybe I would have got the proper catechism, but he didn't. The smoke is sainted, enter through some crack. Well, come on, Holy Father, go put your finger in it. That's what you're there for, really. Instead, he's signing off on all kinds of new things.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is, I think, the most charitable perspective to have of recent popes. JP2 and Benedict XVI, you get the feeling that on the one hand they knew that it was all wrong, but why didn't they do more? Why didn't they do more?
I have my fear. It's, to me, I know it's always fear, because we know that these are spiritual things going on. What we're talking about, this is not something committees. This is spiritual. And when you answer in the spiritual life, you must have courage. You have to, that's why I was saying your faith. You have to hold on to your faith. And for us, and I know as a missionary, you don't have the thorns behind your back saying, oh yeah, we got you. Go ahead. We got you here. Here's $5,000 for your next project. Go. You're lucky you have $5, but that project is still right before you. God still has that right before you. That big fish is still right there. All you got is $5. Do you stop and say, well, I guess this is not for me to do? No, you give it everything that you have, because that's what God is asking me to do. It may take my life, but what do I care if it takes my life? And so that's what I'm talking. That's what I do not feel, see, experience in the modern church. Manly courageism. And see, they'll say, well, what you're talking about is defying the Pope. Yes, I am. And it does take courage because if the Holy Father were to show up right now, I'd go and I'd salute him, I'd genuflect, I'd kiss his shoes. I do not because I believe it. I'd address him as Peter, and then I would stand up and I'd say, what are you doing? Because I had that right if he was going to, not that he would, but so I get it. I'm not denying any of those things, because there were times when that happened. Paul did it to Peter. That's our first example, and all throughout the centuries. I mean, go to the times of the anti-popes, Avignon popes. St. Catherine. What was St. Catherine doing? Was she standing there counting her beads? Oh no, we must be loyal to the Pope. No one say anything. Everyone be quiet. And in fact, she had a mouth on her. If you can read Italian. So things happen, God chooses the saints for the time. And remember, when I talk to people, saints are people who are on the road of divine providence. That's what I believe, because you're working with God. True sainthood doesn't happen until you've entered into heaven. That's when sainthood happens. But in the sense, when we see it in the Holy Bible, or when we refer to, I always look at people, if you're on the path of sainthood, if you are doing everything you can to follow the holy will of God. But I meet few who are actually doing that, if any.
Yeah, and few who are willing.
Yeah.
Few who are willing to. And that is what is needed, both in terms for us as Old Romans and for traditional Catholics. We need people, who are prepared to be courageous and to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune.
And can I mention before, because I know we're getting on time, I keep looking at this, everyone knows I always have this on my board. It's usually down here. I put it up here on purpose. I did not know that the board was going to be visible today. But I think everyone knows what happened in Texas this week. And that happens to be where my family is from, both sides of my family. That area of Texas. I spent so many summers playing there, wonderful memories, not in Uvalde, but in a small town, not too far from Uvalde, smaller, believe it or not. But one of the things I thought of right away, because if you noticed, a lot of those people, they showed up with rosaries and they started to, you could see there were sort of Catholic things coming out. But I guarantee you, that church, not that I've been there, but because I know the people, they're not traditional. They're very, very progressive, terribly progressive, the kind that they talk about in the film. And the reason why I pointed out is because they're also the ones that are searching for answers. And when they search for answers in terrible tragedy like this, they have nothing.
Yeah.
Because there really is no faith. What they know is emotion.
Yeah.
You know, the singing and what feels good and oh yes and oh Lord, you know. But when this happens, there's nothing there. And it's the saddest thing to be around for me, and I'm sure for Excellency. It's so sad because you want to, again, you're the father, they're asking for something to eat. And you want to feed them, you want to fill them with everything they need. And they don't know, you know. Now you can be, that's why our presence is so important. Because you can be around, and presence, that's why presence, I wish I was there. Because I would just be there. Just to be around those people because they need it. So in a special way, I know the old Romans people all over the world, people tend to say this, but we do. I want to know in a special way because the old Romans have our Texas connection, that we remember them in a very special way this week.
Absolutely, absolutely. And with that, unfortunately, we're going to have to end. Bless you and thank you all for joining. We hope that was interesting and informative. If you haven't watched it, do watch A Perfect Storm. It is worth watching, and especially if you're new to tradition or unfamiliar with tradition, at least it'll give you some insight and some information and thus understanding as to why people like us exist and what it is we're trying to preserve and perpetuate for future generations. This is for the salvation of souls and for the salvation of the world. Dominus vobiscum, et cum spiritu tuo, sit nomen Domini benedictum, ex hoc nunc et usque in saecula, adiutorium nostrum in nomine Domini, qui feci caelum et terram. Benedictio Dei omnipotentis, Patri et Filii et Spiritus Sancti descendet super vos et mane et semper. Amen. From all of us here at Unscripted, good night, God bless, and we will see you next week for the Vigil of Pentecost. Yes. Until then, take care and God bless.